Here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the All About Paisley podcast, episode 9. And we have a very special guest in episode 9, Brian Hannan. Brian is the manager of Abbey Books down in Wellmeadow Street, is the author of 15 books, and has also done a number of talks for Paisley Heritage relating to the Glen Cinema disaster. So very honoured to have you a part of the podcast,
Hi,
everybody.
Very nice, glad to be here. Thanks very much.
Yes,
Thanks for
so
the invitation.
can have a nice wee chat about all things.
We need a clap.
Way! Fantastic. Yeah, so thanks very much for joining. I just want to talk about the bookshop for a bit.
Sure,
If you
yep.
could just discuss what the ins and outs of the bookshop.
Well, I discovered when I was doing some research and something else that we're actually bang in the middle of Paisley's heritage.
Right.
Because if you come out of our front door,
Uh-huh.
you've on the right-hand side, you've got the snail statues. Next
Yes.
door to that, you've got Coates Memorial. If you go across the road from us, you're going up the road to Oakshaw.
Yes.
If you go to the left, you've got Coffin End, Tannahill's Cottage and the Witch as well.
That's right.
So I'm very conscious now of how important a part the bookshop plays in Paisley's heritage.
Uh-huh.
And we're trying to build up more books about Paisley.
That's
Oh,
good.
yes. I don't think you're missing anything out. I think that's the top.
No, yeah. So
You've got the John Nielsen statue really as well.
exactly, yeah.
So you've got it all, you've pretty much got it all. So that's majestic. And obviously we talk quite a lot of things about all the kind of guides and stuff we're doing. So anything we could do
Yeah,
together
that's
to amplify
great.
that, I'd be looking forward to it.
It does. So the bookshops, this is the 40th year of the bookshop. So it's one of the
Wow.
oldest shops in Paisley.
Wow.
It's this. I think this is its fourth place it's been. It started out in Gordon Street in the town centre. Then it moved to the West End about nearly 20 years ago, I think. And this is our second shop in the West End. I effectively started as a customer.
Mm-hmm.
I came in there and I loved all these old books. I'm a collector of books myself. I've got far too big a collection. Just eventually, George, the owner, once said to me, do you want to come and work in a day a week? So I started working a day a week. Then it was 2 days. Then it was covering for holidays. And then when he wanted to retire, he asked me if I would take it over. So I think there's a certain proportion of people in the world whose ideal job would be to run a bookshop of
I'm
any
next, Brian. Just
of
so you
any
know.
kind.
I'm next.
Take a
But
ticket.
the difference between an ordinary bookshop, a bookshop for new books, and a bookshop for old books is, I think, you've got a far wider knowledge of books. So most people who run a new bookshop would, by and large, be doing things with working things out by computer. This book goes here, this book goes there, judging on sales or judging on what we want to try and sell. We've got 120, we've got 40,000 books and we've got 120 different categories.
Wow.
And we never know when the customer comes through the door what they're going to be asking for.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our biggest selling sections are philosophy, religion, Stephen King, and science fiction and fantasy.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
So we get and this religion and the philosophy sections are next door to each other, and people often go from one to the other. So you would be very surprised what people are looking for. But it means that I'm a regular reader, but most people who are regular readers regularly read the same thing. Because I'm running this bookshop and we're getting books in all the time, I'm reading far more books of a wider variety than I ever did before, partly because I'm saying, I never knew there was a book in 1893 about rabbits or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, you just find these books and somebody's written a book on that before. Got a book on this morning, Infant Diseases and Health in 1933,
Wow.
first edition. And you know, you just see all these old books, and the bulk of our stock isn't as old as that, obviously. It's mostly, but you're still seeing books on every subject under the sun.
Yeah.
So I got a wee collection of what somebody gave today was a wee selection of books on architecture, and amongst those was not Rennie McIntosh, the other fella, Alexander Greek Thompson. There was a big battle of Alexander Greek Thompson. I looked it up, worth 45 quid. We never sell in for that. It'll be about £15 in our window. But it was a brilliant book, you know, and I'm looking for it. Yeah, I know. Alexander Greek Thompson. So we get that. And the other, I was talking about to somebody about this today. people get excited when they find the book they've been looking for that's been lost. And they've never found it. There might be a collector, but they might not. I had a lovely guy who was in about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he bought an old Enid Blyton book. And he said, and he was about my age, and he said, I read this at my granny's when I was 7.
Oh, wow.
So it was just a big emotional thing for him. And they're not a guy who came in, this is well past now, but a guy, sometimes people come in and you see from the look on their face that they know they've got a bargain. You know, you're selling this for £1.50. Did you know this is worth 40 quid? And I'm saying, no, I didn't. But, you know, as long as you're happy.
So that's a wee error. That's supposed to be a 4.
No, I'm delighted. I'm delighted if somebody finds a book that's worth a lot of money that we've not noticed, because with 40,000 books, you can't go through them all. But a guy came up to the counter with a book, and it was maybe 1912 or something like that. Just look at an ordinary book. It was a work of fiction, and he just had that look in his face, and I said, you're going to tell me this book means something? He said, this cover was designed by Charles Rennie Mackintosh.
Ooh.
I said, you've got to be kidding. He said, Charles Rennie Mackintosh designed 6 book covers in his life. Hill House was built for Blackie, the book publishers. And Blackie and Rennie Mackintosh got on well, and Blackie said to him, would you mind doing some book covers for me? So he did 6. They're not, there was no contract, so there's no provenance, you can't trace them. But this guy said, we're ordinary people, we're not collectors, we're not art people. He said, but we found one, and then we realised if we could get all 6, we'd have something that nobody else would ever have.
Yeah, that's true.
So they just go around bookshops, second-hand bookshop, looking for these. So he already had 3, and this was his 4th.
Oh, I could
so
only
he's
imagine.
Like 2/3 of the way there.
And he was jumping up and down.
Yeah, he's given me the 2 that are missing, and I'm thinking, will I ever remember to look at a cover to say, is that what? So obviously I don't. So
You were quite pleased with that because you've got that substantial collection that you managed to fulfill it.
That's fantastic. I mean, you want people to come in and go out with, you know, our books are so cheap. People are going out with 30 or 40 books, a huge stack.
Yeah.
I mean, you see my Instagram, it's often about people and the books that.
Well, I know the first time I came in, because I tend to buy books on eBay or and then I thought, I bet this shop's dead expensive, and I was pleasantly surprised when I saw that.
The bulk of our books are £2.
It definitely has that magic of a bookshop that you've
and
got.
the smell when you walk in and you smell
magical books
you don't get that with
you'll
the
never
Kindle,
read. You'll never know you've read.
Yeah, there's boxes of books everywhere that run.
It's amazing. It really is.
I'm always hoping to sell books so as I can get some of those boxes out from under the counter. Thinking, what the heck was in those?
Wow.
Who gave them to us?
Yeah.
You know?
So how many books a week do you read yourself?
I usually read, if I'm on holiday, I'll read a book a day.
Really?
Book
I'm
a
a book a day, man.
Wow.
But
Get
if
Guinness on the phone.
because I'm just totally relaxed and I just read books. But I've just been on holiday and I read 3. This was very interesting. I saved up a book. I said, I want to read this book. There was a new book out about Paul Gauguin, the French painter. And I thought, that's it. And I'd seen it reviewed, and I said, I want to read that. So I read it, and I thought it was fantastic because his reputation had suffered because they thought he'd spread syphilis on an island. But somebody had found his teeth, and it turned out he didn't have syphilis. I didn't know you could check it, but they did. So now his reputation is coming back up, and this woman has decided the time's right to write a book for him, and it's fascinating. He had a really fascinating life. A bit like Van Gogh, he was mostly destitute most of his life.
Right,
Didn't make money from his paintings at all.
Shocking statistic that people get famous once they pass.
Yeah. So I read this book, and then I thought, I wonder if she's written any other ones, because it was so well written and so interesting. So it turned out she'd written a book on Nietzsche, the philosopher. Nietzsche had been one of our biggest sellers. I thought, I know a couple of things about Nietzsche, like, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. If you look into the abyss long enough, the abyss looks back at you. But literally, that's all I knew about Nietzsche. So lo and behold, so I thought, I'd take that book away. And that was fantastic as well. And then, as luck had it, I managed to get one of the boxes that we'd had donated by the science fiction writer Christopher Priest. And I'd managed to open a new one on them. And there was another one of our books, which was a biography of Edward Munch, the guy that did The Scream. So I'm 100 pages into that.
Oh, yes.
So it's just
and you kind of pick them up like episodes.
Yeah, and they are related in some way, because the woman who wrote them, although her name is Sue Prideaux and she sounds pretty much English, actually she grew up in Norway.
Oh,
So these are Scandinavian influences.
right, it's amazing.
Yes, it was just amazing.
You have a TV?
I've got a TV. I watch TV. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think I'd get any work done in the bookshop if I had all these books to go through.
That's one of the problems. You've got all these books to get through and stack up.
I
And
think I'd be happy to locate it. It'd be a good idea to locate it. So what number, Well Meadow Street?
21.
21, and that's across from...
It's across from across from a shop that's shut. So it's across from the
Co-op?
It's almost across from the West
tea
Bray,
shop.
isn't it? You've got the West Bray, isn't
It's a
it? To
couple-
go up
just
so we
to
could,
the
we could
observatory
locate it.
and
It's-
stuff.
it's-
Yeah,
it's new people are coming.
Yeah.
And how would individuals follow you? Facebook, Instagram?
They follow me on Instagram, which
It's
is
Abbey Book.
Abbey Books,
Uh-huh.
Paisley maybe.
Yeah.
Facebook and the other one not so good at.
And you're only kind of quality bookshop in town.
Yes, effectively.
Yeah.
And the thing I like about Instagram, because one of my customers explained how important this was. So she said, you just take a photograph and then you stick it on. They said, well, that's fantastic. Take a photograph, put it on, boom. Somebody can see the books that you've just coming in or whatever. So it's just amazing, and then you get really good responses with a whole stack of what used to be called pulp fiction. You've heard the title pulp fiction, but it did mean something in books back in the day. It always meant books that were printed directly to paperback.
Oh,
They
okay.
weren't hardback,
Right.
and they were often slightly garish covers. So people often these days collect them for the covers rather than.
Right, yes.
So we'd got about 70 of these in. So I was going berserk. I said, "This is going to be Pulp Fiction Day." Bang, bang, bang out on the Instagram.
Amazing. And you must meet some really interesting people.
Fantastic. We had I think the Paisley Daily Express had just run a piece on this guy. We had a guy who came in who was a magician.
A magician.
A magician.
Wow.
So it was fun. So I was just chatting away to him, and he was just fantastic,
Yeah.
interesting. So I phoned up Taylor on the Daily Express and said, "You might be interested in this guy. He's going down to the Magic Circle in London, and he's doing this and he did. Oh, that's interesting." But we the guys come in. People in an ordinary shop or an ordinary bookshop, you don't really talk to your customers. If you go into Waters, you're not going to stand there chatting about books, are you? You're not going to ask your customers what they're interested in, because in a new bookshop, everything is easily got signposted.
That's
The
right.
second-hand bookshop, I'm trying to say to people, well, that's what it says, but you might not find those books there. They might have moved, or they might be somewhere else, or we've moved them or whatever. So you're often asking people what are they interested in, what kind of books you're looking for, and you're giving them a general guides where to go. And in that way, then somebody says, "I'm looking for this because," and then you're getting a story. And every time there's a donation of books, there's a story there. Not just every book tells a story, but every book collection tells a story.
Oh, yeah.
Because it tells you what somebody was really interested in. We had a fantastic donation, actually, from somewhere in Greenock, which was the guy had been a GP in Greenock. And so we had a collection of kind of old medical books, which are interesting-ish. But he came from 4 generations of sea captains.
Wow.
And at the bottom of a box, I found a letter from the South China Seas. One of the sea captains had been in the South China Seas. So I actually have a laundry bill from Shanghai. From a Chinese laundry, in Shanghai. And there was a collection of there was something about the Titanic. There was a collection of a trade magazine for seamen from 1939.
That's unbelievable.
So I'm just sitting there going through all these things. This is just
travelling the world via your fingertips.
You don't know where they've came from, really, do
I
you?
have known there was a magazine for merchant seamen.
You got a favourite book, Rachel?
Oh,
I'll tell you mine while you have a think. I don't know the author.
That's
You ready? Papillon.
Henry Charrier.
It's a brilliant book, and I love the movie as well. But the
Yeah,
book's
yeah.
brilliant as well. I read
Actually, the movie was on at the weekend.
That's my favourite movie.
I missed the first 20 minutes.
It's the best buddy movie ever.
Yeah,
and you just
that's
cry at
great.
the end because the resilience of the guy trying to escape. And he's still he's an elderly individual, and he's still trying to escape. And that end.
And the author died quite not quite young, but he died at the age of 53 after about 7 years after he published the book, after he'd gone through this terrible life.
Oh, no.
And then, he died quite young.
And his pictures in the front cover with the butterfly.
Yeah. He did a sequel, but I can't remember what that's called. Papillon is a great book.
I tend to read a lot of true crime.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
And about serial killers and things like that. And then sometimes I'll read them before I go to bed, and then I'll have nightmares, and then I'll wake up and go, why did I have a nightmare? And I was reading a Myra Hindley book, or I was reading Jeffrey Dahmer or whatever. But yeah.
We've got a nice, interesting section on true crime, and that is always interesting because that's the interest. I mean, most modern, most, I don't know, you call them new bookshops, will have whatever's come out now.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't have the books that were published 20 or 30 years ago about corruption in New York or whatever. So we get all these old books. And I had a book in the window called, I can't remember what it was called, basically everybody who's been executed in Britain.
Oh, right. I'd love that one.
It's just the
A to Z of
of people who've been executed and why. So you get these, there's tremendous changes in styles in the type of books that are written because these days true crime books tend to be written in a certain way. Old true crime books tend to be written in quite a different, more interesting way, I always feel.
Interesting.
So you get much more information, and generally your author is a true expert, not somebody who's just said, I can make somebody write a true crime book. And they've generally got a far more comprehensive
understanding, of criminology. And baby body anatomy and all that. So, and obviously, being an author yourself, I mean, this is breaking the seal, Brian, and getting you on, but we'll be having you on numerous times. 15 books, that's quite the catalogue. I don't even know where to start. But I guess I'd be interested to talk about the ones that we're interested in.
Sure.
And obviously you've done your talks on the Glen Cinema, so I do consider you the kind of focal professional on all things Glen Cinema. So could you just discuss how you came across the interest of writing that book?
Well, I'm not from Paisley. I'm a bit of an expert in film. He said modestly. But I bought on Gumtree a collection of 500 press books. Now, press books, if you ran a cinema back in the day, and I'm talking the 50s and 60s, in order to sell it to you, the studio would send you a brochure that we could be in from 2 pages A5 to 28 pages A3, full colour blinders. So basically what they were trying to do was to give you reasons to sell this film, to rent this film in the first place and then sell it. So at the front, it would just be stuff on the stars. At the back would be all the adverts. So basically in those days, if you booked this film, you would take a copy of this press book and cut out there was adverts at the back, and they were all shapes and sizes. If you wanted a big quarter-page advert, that's the one you cut out. You took it into your local newspaper. That's what made that's how they made the advert up. If you wanted a little 2-inch, 2-column thing, that's what you cut out. And they had a whole variety of adverts depending on what you thought your market was.
Right.
So, but at the back of this, beside all this, was all the ideas they thought would help you to sell this. So if you had a film, say, set in Paris, they'd say, American Paris, they'd say, why don't you get the local kids to do a project making Meccano?
How to market it.
How to market.
Right.
Make Meccano Eiffel Towers.
Right.
So you've got Father the Bride, do a tie-up with local bridal shops, try and do a Bride of the Week kind of competition.
Right.
So I thought, since I'd 4 years worth of this, from 1950 to 1954, I thought it'd be really interesting to see how many of these ideas actually came to fruition. So I went down to the Heritage Centre, got out 5 years' worth of Paisley Daily Express over a certainly long period, and went through these laboriously. And as you know, it's daily, so each issue, I can't remember how many pages, when I'm just going through looking for all this stuff.
That's incredible.
So after 5 years, I discovered nothing. There had been no examples of this whatsoever.
That's surprising. No entrepreneurial cinema owners?
It isn't to say nobody did it. It might just be to say that the newspaper didn't think it was worth reporting. But on the front page of every page of Daily Express was adverts. It wasn't news on the front page. And the biggest advert was the cinemas. And it showed what was shown every day. So when I was doing this, something in me had said, maybe a nerd had got into me and inherited and took me over and said, it'd be really interesting to know what was shown every day.
Oh, yes.
So when I came to the end of this futile project, I discovered 5 years worth.
Right, quite the body of work.
Of what was showing at Paisley Cinemas.
Right.
So I decided to turn that into a book. Called Paisley, the Pictures, 1950, and then I've done the 50 and 51. And that was fascinating.
Right, so you're volume 3 of that now?
Volume 3.
Right,
There's 2 more to come if I can get round to doing them. But because of that, and I say because I wasn't from Paisley, so the first book was primarily something about the cinemas, but mostly about the films, what people were watching, what we watched in Paisley that was different to what they watched in London, how long it took pictures to come. And there was a big thing on the back of the book just showing you what was showing at every movie,
right? Yes.
When every movie was showing in Paisley and at what cinema. And when I gave this to people, have come in and said, that book has been fantastic for my grandfather. I used to go to my grandfather and I'd never find anything to talk to him. I gave him that book and said, show me, grandfather, where you saw this film. And he'd say, oh, that's it. And he said, we've had people have come into me in the shop and shown me a copy of the book, said, my granddad saw all these films.
Wow, that's amazing.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, that must feel really good as well.
It just got people older people talking about something that you could relate to. So anyway, so book 2, I realised if I was going to do a second one, which was roughly the same story, I realised I didn't really know that much about Paisley Cinemas. So I went back and did some research, and that's when I discovered that there'd been this fire.
Right.
Because I didn't know about the cinemas.
So how many cinemas were there in Paisley?
8.
Right, 8. So there were loads of cinemas.
1950, 8 cinemas, 13,000 seats. But you couldn't, so 13,000 seats, 90-odd thousand people in Paisley, so you couldn't all go to the cinema on a Saturday night. So what people did, I discovered when I did some talks on this and people would relate their experiences to me. And they said that and I found from talking to other people, so basically towards the last show on a Saturday night, the usherettes had to go through the cinema and count how many seats were going to be still free. And then they'd tell the commissioner, who was the guy with the top hat that stood outside, and he would then go along the queue and just put down his hand like a guillotine and say, "Yous aren't going to get in." So anybody who couldn't get in went across the road, hopped on a bus, and got on the bus as far as the next cinema along Paisley Road West. They got off the bus, stood in another queue. Maybe if they didn't get in there, they get back on a bus. So in those days, people didn't they didn't care what picture they went to. They weren't marketed the way they
because it wasn't trailers as readily.
You'd get trailers, but you could only get trailers for the next week's films, and only if you were in one cinema. They wouldn't have shown you a trailer.
Market them as much, right?
They wouldn't show you all the trailers. They'd show you the trailer that was shown next week. So you'd only see that. So people wanted to go to the cinema, and the movies didn't last that long. Some of the times, mostly they didn't even last a week. Mostly they ran for 3 days. If you missed it, it was gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
There was no television
or tape, VCR or anything at that point.
Yeah, so it was just gone. So because of that, and then I started to realise there was this disaster. So I thought, that's interesting. And I started to do research on that, which was quite difficult because there wasn't anything. I was kind of basically doing the original work. Nobody had really done anything for it.
Which is surprising, isn't it? The biggest cinema disaster globally.
They didn't really talk about it. That's what I discovered. There wasn't like a 10th anniversary all the time, or 20th anniversary where they would review it. So they really didn't only start talking about it till really the 80s.
Right.
And then not really there wasn't a big, like, which you would get these days, 50 years on, you'd get a big program. There wasn't really that. So all the people who had survived it, really, there wasn't a ton of people to talk to. So most of the experience we've got from that are coming from a handful of people who remembered it, but basically they were pretty small at the time. So they're not actually giving you a complete picture the way if you'd been an adult. You know, the people at the concert disasters, you know, there's plenty of adults who can say, yeah, this is exactly what happened. Younger kids, it's much harder. So you were trying to stitch together quite a lot. And I discovered that the government had instituted an inquiry. So I got a fair bit of information from that. There was a court case, and I got a fair bit of information from that. But a lot of it was just trying to put two and two together. And I did a lot of research on safety of film, and that a lot of stuff came up from that. But there wasn't, for example, so the Strathclyde Council, when it came into its existence, just dumped millions of tons worth of records. So you'd have thought that it would have been records relating to the RAH for this thing. There was none. There was no records relating to the fire brigade. There was none. There wasn't. You'd thought there would have been, even in the annual reports.
Microfiche machine or something.
You'd have thought there was something. There was nothing. So it was quite hard to put it all together and kind of work out how something had happened and kind of just. So that was, but also as Rachel knows, it's quite a lot to do. I mean, it's the worst. The most difficult book I've ever done.
Yeah,
and it's so well written. You know, I've read it myself, and you've written it so well that it's obviously sometimes it's a hard read. I mean, it must have been hard for you researching and writing that. But I know a couple of times I did have to put it down, you know, because I thought, oh, this is really, heartbreaking.
The worst part in some respects was, I knew there'd been a fire. I knew that there was at the grave, there was a special section of the graves. And I hadn't gone down to the graves more or less until I'd written the book. And then I went down to the graves in the cemetery in Hawkhead, and I was shocked at the state of them. I thought, you've got to be kidding.
Oh, not looked after.
They've not been looked after at all. I mean, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to Paisley beyond the canal boat, and nobody's looking after this. This is
there was
terrible.
A campaign recently to look after headstones, wasn't
it? Yeah, and it's not. It wouldn't be that difficult to do. I mean, I thought if they did a crowdfunding and just said, right, we're going to put a base on each of these graves for nothing. I mean, I've spoken to funeral directors and people who do graves, and they said it's not necessarily a great cost. There is a kind of maybe a vague legal thing. Who owns the grave? Well, the council paid for all the graves, which was one of the very good things. Council was very good in the aftermath of the thing. But whether contracts were passed over to the people, I would guess they weren't. So maybe the onus still falls on Renfrewshire Council to do this.
So one of the aims of the charity arm would be to look at memorials and stuff that need cleaned up, something that we've kind of thought about. So for people that are unfamiliar with the Glen Cinema disaster, you'd give us a wee bit of a
so basically, traditionally back in the day in Hogmanay, you got the kids out the house because the house had to be spick and span for the evening and for the next day's celebrations. New Year's Day was far more important in Scotland than Christmas. So kids were chucked out the house. In those days, they didn't have children's movie programs. There wasn't the equivalent of an ABC Minors thing that you got in the 50s and 60s. They didn't have kids' films. They didn't have cartoons. Kids went to see the same thing the adult went. There was no, there was, what do you call it, censorship, but not in the way we know it. There wasn't an X certificate or anything. And basically nobody really made movies that were going to upset everybody. So the kids were just sent out to whatever cinema was shown. Kids would normally go to a matinee. In the evening, if you wanted to take your kids to the cinema, you'd pay full price. If you took them they went to a matinee, they paid a reduced price.
Right.
So basically, people just get chucked out and went. So by and large, in those days, most people went to the cinema that was closest to them. So this would attract the Glen. It would attract cinema mostly from around that area, which is what happened. Apart from MD, who happened to be visiting and was staying with somebody. So the kids went to the movie. All started. They're all sitting there. It was benches. They were sitting in. It wasn't a plush cinema like you get these. Mostly benches in the downstairs where the kids were. And so what happened was, one of the problems with film in those days, film was combustible.
Right.
The thing that made If people always remember the silver screen, that's what silent movies were called, the silver screen, black and white movies. And the reason it was called the silver screen was there was actual silver in the film, and when you projected it, you got that little dazzle.
Oh, okay.
So that was what it was called. But it contained something else called gun cotton.
Right.
And gun cotton was an explosive. It was used in explosive.
Oh.
I don't know the chemicals and why film contains this, but it did. And it could instantly combust.
Right.
And when it combusted, you couldn't put it out. You couldn't put it. You could maybe put it out these days with the kind of putting blanket type or whatever they've got these days you can squish it with. But they didn't have that in those days. I don't think they even had fire blankets. So water was all you put things, but you couldn't put if you put a 50 gallons on top of this, you wouldn't put it out.
Right.
So and the fumes that come off were toxic.
Okay.
So you wanted to not be anywhere near this.
It's not the best of combinations, really.
No. And generally, it did happen occasionally, but generally didn't. And everything just went on. So the film was shown. The cinema had a projectionist and an assistant projectionist. So in those days, a film came in reels. So you'd get a film that was 8 reels long, and you changed the reels on the projector. And when you changed the reels, you had to rewind the reels the same way if you remember the old videos.
Yes.
Took the video back to the rental shop, you had to rewind it. So the assistant projectionist's job was to literally take that reel every time that was finished, take it into what was called the rewinding room and rewind it and make sure it went back in its box, ready to show again, not somebody then trying to show it and realise it was back to front. So when he took it out, he noticed it was smoking. So he tried to put it. This cinema had a side door, but it was locked, so he couldn't get it out. He couldn't get the door open. So he put it down, ran through the cinema to get to the manager who was up. Manager's office was up the stairs. All the kids watching, going, "Oh my goodness, what's happening? That's exciting." Guy went upstairs, got the manager. Manager came down, and the pair of them raced through the cinema because the manager would know how dangerous this was. And of course, all the kids turned to see what was going on. Big excitement. The doors at the back opened. They saw smoke. Boom. Panicked. Now there were stories that somebody had shouted fire, but I'm not sure if that's the case. Anyway, they headed for the exits. But the fire exit was padlocked.
Right. Yes. So we should probably locate where we are. So where was
Glen Cinema is in Dyer's Wine, so it's basically coming out the station. It's about 2nd Street up past it. It's kind of round the corner from the piazza.
And there's still an effigy, a stone effigy of it?
Right, but the building's still there. I mean, it was down the side. It was kind of an odd shaped building because it didn't have an entrance right on the high street or the side entrance. It kind of had a kind of tunnel entrance that was slightly set back. Anyway, there was a spare piece of ground beside it, which was what this child had been trying to chuck the thing out. The manager managed to kick this door open, chucked a canister, smoking, out into the spare ground where it just did nothing because there's nothing it can do. It's not an enclosed space.
Stone.
Smoke just evaporates and it eventually goes out. But unfortunately, these kids had been trying to get out the fire escape. It was locked and basically just piled on top of each other until they suffocated each other.
Oh, yes.
Basically, that's what happened.
71.
Yes. And that was that where the Good Templar Hall entrance
Yeah, that's
is?
what it was.
And
the Glen Cinema was the old Temple Hall.
Right. And there's still bits of the ceiling in the furniture shop.
Theoretically,
right.
Nobody's ever really seen it because they're having to knock through something to get you there, and everybody's worried about asbestos.
Oh yes,
that would be one of the things.
Yes, but the tragedy of that is insurmountable, really, to even kind of fathom. It's always difficult for myself running the history page because every hug my knee, I need to post it up and remind everyone. Yeah. And it's but
you saw, I mean, in those days, primary schools were smaller, classes were smaller.
Right.
So, one of the things that I did realise when I was coming to the end of doing all my research, I realised that a lot of these kids had come from the same schools.
Jeez.
So you're thinking that their pals had said goodbye to them the day before when playing football in the street or whatever, and then when they're back to school,
An empty seat.
Half these classes were empty.
And some of the kids were all from the same family as well,
Same
weren't they? So
families.
some others lost all their children.
It's been a bit dark.
I get a lot more, if I could, I mean, I might rewrite it, I might add to it, because since I wrote it, I've got a lot of people coming in saying my grandfather, my uncle, my great uncle was in. There's some terrible sad stories that weren't in the book. There's one boy who was just coming up for 14, the school leaving age, and the minute he could leave school, he left school and he was never seen again. He couldn't. I mean, the things that you would know these days about post-traumatic stress, all the things that these days you'd have tons of counsellors dealing with, had nobody doing that those days. So the guilt of being the one person in the family who survived, or the guilt of taking the kids, or the kids, you've not got those. The guy who lost the shoe, some kid was terrified of going through. He'd lost his shoe. Terrified of getting home, because when he did go home, he got hammered around the head with his shoe. There was a fire.
Exactly.
Because there was no social media. Nobody would have a phone in their house.
So how many kids were there in the cinema?
It's hard to work out, because but we reckon about 500 or 600.
Yeah, because I'm
judging from the takings,
the weight of all these children to
well, they didn't all go out the front. Some nobody really tried to go out the back, because that's where the smoke was. But some went up the stairs, and some clearly heard the screams and didn't go in. So some went up the stairs, kicked in windows, and by the time, there's not really a timetable that the MD's given to say when this happened, how long was it before adults had come to the rescue. I don't think it was that long.
No.
I think it was quite straightforward. But there was a policeman outside. Some lad kicked in a window, cut himself. The policeman battered in the rest of the window, got him out, and then other kids get out.
I mean, it would be the individual that found all these kids.
Yep, that's the fireman.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus.
I know, and that was a bit I found really hard in the book, when it was saying that they were piled, so high, and just all the limbs were all intertwined.
Yeah, I mean, if you imagine just all that, and then the families going to the mortuary at the hospital, which is obviously a makeshift mortuary. It was just.
I mean, I don't think there's been a bigger disaster in Paisley that I can think of.
No.
And so it changed safety laws.
Changed safety laws. Before that, fire safety doors came inwards. So after that, they came outwards. But the most important thing they changed, which did have ramifications throughout the entire world, and one thing that Paisley actually instigated, strangely enough, is that if you remember going to school, you will always have had a fire alarm test.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you would always have a partner you had to walk out with, holding their hands, going slowly.
Right.
Don't panic, no rush. Now that's what they instigated.
Wow.
Because they realised that most people die in fires from panic, not from smoke.
Oh yes. So
that was almost the British government immediately instigated something like that, because
2x2 policy.
2x2. But basically because nobody had been trained how to react in a fire. All of us, going to school, everybody who's ever been to school has been trained how to react in a fire. They might not do it, and they might still panic, but in a general situation where there's a fire alarm going off, and we're not talking a terrorist bomb type thing, most people will evacuate the building. If you're working anywhere, wherever you work, you'll be getting a fire test every month.
That's right.
And every now and then it'll be real, it'll be a live one. You've got to go and do it. And everybody does it. And the more often you do it, the more often that will be your reaction. The whole business of leaving your bag behind, leave everything behind, just get out. And getting into trouble when you don't. So that was the big thing that benefited probably the rest of the world.
So the doors opening out.
Open outwards.
And also the fire alarms being regular and 2 and 2. I mean, nowadays...
Well, it wasn't so much... The 2 and 2 thing was just for kids. You didn't want kids to be rushing out on their own. But we all learned to do it too. If you did it 2 by 2 for the 13 odd years you were at school, and primary school and secondary school, when you became an adult, that's the way it's still done. You're still more or less going out together with somebody, aren't you?
And nowadays those doors wouldn't have been padlocked.
Well, the padlock thing was, it shouldn't have been padlocked.
No.
That was the big issue.
I would hate to have been that individual.
Yep.
Wow.
And my reckoning, there was no real questioning. He wasn't. When he went on trial for homicide.
Oh, did he? Right.
Yeah. So there was, in those days, there wasn't the business version of that, which it would be manslaughter. There's a difference between culpable homicide and homicide. And there's also manslaughter. So most businesses that do something like that, it's a manslaughter charge.
Right. And was he guilty?
He got off.
Yeah.
Because he clearly wasn't guilty of manslaughter, of homicide, didn't he plan it?
No.
But my reckoning was that he had a flat above the cinema. And my reckoning was if he wanted to go in and out of the cinema, he would have to open big, heavy front doors if he was going in that way. And my reckoning is he used the back door. So as it was, he just sneak in the back. It's not like firearms were going to go off. That wouldn't have happened in those days.
No.
So that was my reckoning. And he just locked it, padlocked it so as nobody else could go in. Or he padlocked it to stop kids sneaking in.
Without paying.
Which kids would often.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful story I got from when I was talking about this to various people, and they said there was a cinema in Johnson, and the toilets were outside, which wouldn't have been surprising for cinemas in those days. It wasn't those days, this was later on. And at the beginning of every show that was projecting to kids, a matinee, the commissioner would go around the front and get everyone to show them their hands. And if your hands were black, you get chucked out because it was an open, as I say, it was an open toilet. To get over the toilet, you had to climb in over the toilet, over the bricks, and they had painted the bricks.
Oh, deliberately.
So you would come in with paint. Yes, you were caught. Get out. Yeah.
You know you.
yeah, because it's sin now. People sneak in. You still hear people sneaking in.
Yeah.
Fires or paint it to one firm and go into another. That's a more common thing.
So what was the media like? From Paisley, telling Paisley, but also the national news, was it big coverage? Do you know?
It got covered in Variety magazine in America. Front page news.
Wow, international news.
Well, it became an international thing. There wasn't international news the way there is now, but the main newspapers traded. If a huge incident, like 71 kids died, that's big numbers. So yes, and also it did create there was a lot of feedback. The Heritage Museum's got a lovely box in their secret Santa place.
Where in the high street.
In the high street.
Secret collection.
Secret
No, secret Santa.
Secret Santa. Come in and get a secret.
Because it's red.
and they had a couple of boxes of stuff that the letters that had been sent by people from all over the world.
Wow.
Commiserating, offering. I think there was money offered. There wouldn't be the money that was offered these days because that's not but just some of the nice things that people said, and there was there was a whole printed at the back a lot of the poetry that people composed about it. So there was a pretty big international reaction, but not muted by today's things. If it happened now, you'd have masses.
It's unbelievable. And it's just so difficult. As I said, when I'm running the page, that's every year, I need to post it up, and it's just so difficult to conceive of, really. And that was had ramifications for years in Paisley.
Yeah.
Dark cloud.
Yeah, and yes. I mean, I think the big thing was that people didn't talk about it.
Right.
It was like your dad had been in the war. He never talked about his war experiences. Most fathers who'd been in the World War II or World War I never mentioned it at all. Even with their ex-comrades, it was rarely mentioned. Yeah, just never did, because the experiences were too strange. Nobody would understand what they went through, and also in those days nobody did. So there wasn't really any talking about it. I mean, a lot of the people who'd told me that their granny or great uncle or whatever been in it, they said it would be, maybe when they had grandkids, that's when
they would start opening up about it.
Yeah, or when somebody, or when the other things that had been written about it, or there'd been an article in the paper or something. Then that's when people started to maybe open up a bit, but a lot of people didn't. So you're talking the 500 kids who survived. A handful would have said anything about it.
Just the trauma alone. There was no psychologists like that.
No, and also they would just petrified. I mean, most of them wouldn't even know what was happening.
Or remember it, maybe block it out.
Hopefully not remember it.
Yeah.
I know, and it's all when I posted about the talks that you've so kindly done for us, and people would say in the comments, that their auntie or granny or whoever had been a survivor, and and they say they were one of the lucky ones, and you're thinking, what they witnessed and what they must have seen that day, and the trauma it must have. They'll probably think, oh, I was lucky to survive it, but at the same time, the memories that they've been, they've been left with, it's really difficult.
Terrible. So I've been collecting. People have told me. I've just kind of written things down and tried to get their telephone number and think at some point I'll go back and try and get something about the survivors rather than just
interviews of them. Well, if there's anything I could help with that, very happy to do that.
Sure.
I've never really covered it just because it's so morbid. I've never done anything to really. I remember Tom Urie done a song one Christmas, so helped him share that. But other than that, it's just not something I've ever went near. But not to finish on a somber note. But honestly, thanks so much, Brian, for coming on. You're a fountain of knowledge. So if you've not been to one of the talks, do come along to it, Brian. We got a couple of ideas for some other talks that we're cooking.
It's going to be next year now. Brian was saying he's busy with other projects.
Oh yes, he's
look out on the
busier
page.
than me.
No such thing, honestly. Don't tar me with your brush.
Exactly. But thanks very much for coming on.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome on any time. Sure. So thanks very much, and it's been fantastic.
Thanks a lot.
And it's been a nice chat about that. So, we don't have another guest. I think it's just going to be us talking rubbish next week.
Well, we'll see.
Oh, we'll see.
We can muster someone up.
Potentially. But that's us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Take care, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.
I've been Gavin, and this has been Rachel.
Bye.
Kevin's been Craig's been really busy today, so he's unfortunately had to bow out today. But that's us. Take care for now. Like and subscribe. Bye for now. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.